Welcome to our new series.
Cosmic Monday.
It's almost time for the Cosmic Summit 2025 in Greensboro, North Carolina, June 20th to the 23rd.
Hey, we're generating excitement for the event, guys, by bringing you engaging interviews with some of the speakers and guests from this year's outstanding lineup.
So press in the promo code
Multiverse
to get 10% off your passes to meet, greet, and rub elbows with some of the biggest names on the cutting edge of suppressed and forgotten science,
human origins, and the history of planet Earth.
Join Mike and Dave at the Cosmic Summit,
where truth seekers go to party.
Sometimes, I don't know, in the wider conference room, surely, but you can actually kind of make news too.
Because sometimes the most important question that aren't being asked in the mainstream. And this summit gives us a space to ask them. And of course, I'm also looking forward to meeting people, both old friends and I hope lots of new friends also, that I can share the same curiosity.
Yeah. I have a huge announcement if y'all want to get into it.
Yeah, let's go.
Let's go right to it.
I have been in very good touch now with the Italian researchers behind the COFRE project, right? And they're coming to Greensboro. And they're going to reveal entirely new information to a global audience.
What do you think the role of content creators like your Ben Van Kerkwicks, Wandering Wolf, Michael Collins, as far as bringing these topics to a wider audience?
Oh, it's great. I mean, without Ben, I don't think we'd be in the position we're at. I've met so many people.
Goodness, well, who doesn't have a fascination with the pyramids? Once you start learning about all of these things, well, what do you do with it?
A woman contacted me and told us a story about an artifact that her husband found 50 years ago working on a construction site. And it's an Egyptian artifact. And I have to tell you, this artifact is really, really interesting. But what the hell is it doing in Texas?
Can be passively accepted, spoon-fed models of reality.
Mm-hmm.
People who are willing to think independently, outside the box, free thinkers who are coming together going, you know what? I think that this story of human civilization and human life on this planet is far deeper and far more complex than we've been told.
Join us on the show today as we ride shotgun with forensic geologist and TV personality Scott Wolter.
Hey, Scott was nice enough to call us from the road on his way from San Antonio to Denver after making an exciting discovery.
We worked through some technical difficulties, but we hope you still enjoy our exciting conversation.
Meet Scott at Cosmic Summit 2025 in Greensboro, North Carolina, June 20th to 23rd. See you there.
Okay. Well, Haley and I were down in San Antonio for the weekend to give lectures at the San Antonio Scottish Highland Games. And one of the things that we wanted to do while we were down here is about 6 months ago, a woman contacted me and told us a story about an artifact that her husband found 50 years ago working on a construction site. And it's an Egyptian artifact.
Wow.
And so we were not able to meet with her the last time we were here, but we were able to meet with her yesterday. And I have to tell you, this artifact is really, really interesting. It's not carved out of rock. It looks like it has been placed in a form, and apparently that technology did exist back then, and they did that quite often, apparently. So, but what the hell is it doing in Texas?
Yeah.
So what I'm doing is I have the artifact with me. I'm taking it back to the lab, and I'm going to run some tests on it because I did do a scratch test on a little flake area, and I used a knife. Now, in geology, one of the ways we do hardness tests is with a knife, because a knife is a hardness of 5 on the Mohs hardness scale of 1 through 10. And I thought it might be carbonate or limestone or marble or something like that. And if it was, marble and dolomite have a hardness of 3. So a knife is going to scratch it, right? It didn't scratch it. In fact, the steel rubbed off on the rock. So, and it's not rock, It's some type of synthetic material that looks to me like it was placed in a mold.
Yep.
But it's hard, and it's harder than 5, which surprised me. So I'm going to run some tests. I'm going to take a small piece, put it in an SEM, scanning electron microscope, and see if I can identify whatever this material is. Now, in light of all the new stuff that's going on, the pyramids and the Sphinx are getting older and older and older. I'm not at all surprised by that. And we're going to continue to see that happen on these ancient megalithic sites. They're all going to get older and older, and they're going to go back pre-Younger Dryas. That's my prediction.
Yeah, that's the direction it seems like everything's going. What is the shape of the general shape of the artifact?
Well, you know what it looks like? It kind of looks like a bookend. It's got a flat backing and then a 90-degree angle where it sits. So when you set it up, and then there's an Egyptian figure that's a male figure that's standing. No, he's sitting. And he's got his hands on his knees. And, he's got the typical Egyptian beard. He's got the headdress that's coming down, on his shoulders. And there's text on either side if you're standing it up. And Haley did a little research on that. And it's actually Proto-Greek and Proto-Egyptian.
What?
And so the language on this seems to be quite old, going back somewhere between 3,500 to 4,000 years, we think. Now, that doesn't mean that the piece is old, but there's also a lot of secondary deposits, material that's built up on the surface from being buried in the ground. And that's where it was found. It was found during an excavation. So very, very interesting. And I'm not saying anything conclusive. We have to do more work. But if this thing is legitimate, it goes back 4,000 years or more. And this material could be an advanced type of material that hardened into something extremely hard. And it has conchoidal fracture, which is also consistent with a very hard material.
So, in your lab is in Colorado. That's where you're headed?
No, my lab is back in Minneapolis. I'm going to Colorado to stay with some friends, and I'm going to be visiting Tim Hogan. Are you guys familiar with this? You must be. I know you're familiar with the Gaia series.
I'm really glad you brought Tim up. I was going to ask you how he was doing. I was really pleased to see Tim make the podcast circuit in the last few months. I caught him on 2 or 3 different shows a few months ago, and I'm really looking forward to the masterclass this year at the summit.
Yes. Well, I'm going to be seeing him on Thursday.
Awesome.
And that's another reason I'm going to Colorado. I'm visiting friends and I'm visiting him. He's also a friend. And we're going to talk about, I don't know if you guys know this, but you remember the Mysteries of the Knights Templar show we did together on Gaia?
Yes, sir.
We're doing a 2nd season.
Wow.
All right. That's great news. Very cool.
Yeah.
So we've had one conversation about that already. And that's the other thing that we're going to talk about. So
lots of stuff on the go then.
Yeah, it's going to be good. And but I might jump the shark and talk a little bit about the new stuff at the Cosmic Summit. Because, I mean, it's George's Cosmic Summit. We got to take care of them, right?
Exactly.
It's a great venue to have a little teaser, a little preview content. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah. So that's our tentative plan, and I haven't put the presentation together yet, but it's going to be good. And then, of course, the class. I'm not sure what we're going to do there, but we'll talk about it, and it'll be grand. So you better come to the right class this year.
I got you covered, Scott. I made that promise to myself as soon as, like, halfway through the other presentation. I was like, okay, next year it's Scott. I owe him one.
Well, last year went really good. I don't know if you ever saw this, but Johanna James put together about a 12-minute clip about my part on the runestone, the Kensington Runestone.
Yep, I have seen that. Yes, yeah. She does great work.
And that girl rocked it. She absolutely caught all the important points. She understood them and articulated them back. And I can't wait to see her, because I'm going to give her a hug and I'm going to say, Johanna, you really did a fantastic job. I've never seen anybody digest and process it and get it like she did. So kudos to her.
That's what I really like about what she does. She's very good communicator of ancient history and all this stuff. She takes the information, she communicates it back in a way that's digestible for people who aren't familiar with the disciplines and stuff like that. She's fun, she's passionate, she does really great work. We did want to, as we're doing for all these interviews, if you would give us a little short background of how did you get into forensic geology and what was the inspiration for your show and all that stuff like that, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, well, I mean, I started this forensic lab in 1990. I had worked for about 4 years doing that type of work at another company, and then we started our own company in 1990, and I'm still working. I mean, I'm semi-retired, but I love what I do. There aren't very many people that do this type of work, and even fewer that do it very well. So, they want me to stay, and I'm happy to do that. But basically, what we do is material forensics, or autopsies on concrete and rock. And so we only get contacted when something goes in the ditch, right? So anyway, I really got involved in this world back in the year 2000 when the Kensington Runestone came into my lab. And I never heard of it before. I didn't know what it was. Frankly, I didn't care. I can't fall in love with my projects. But I ended up doing a tombstone study, and I concluded that the weathering of the inscription was hundreds of years old. Therefore, it couldn't be a late 19th century hoax, as everybody claimed, and still claimed that it had to be genuine. And of course, that's when all the trouble started. And then I went looking for the language, the runes, the dialect, the grammar, all of that. Found it all because the rock said it was real. Therefore, all that stuff has to be consistent with the 14th century because it's dated 1362, and found it all. And then I started to look into, who carved it, where did they come from, and why did they come here? And that's what I've been doing for the last 20-something years. And I think I got it figured out.
That's great. And it's opened our eyes to a whole new chapter of American prehistory that certainly isn't being taught about in schools. So we appreciate, and we're fascinated by this stuff. We'll get into that.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And you know what? The truth will eventually rise to the surface. The facts and the evidence are all there. There is no evidence to support a hoax. It's all just statements of authority from misinformed archaeologists that, frankly, there is no archaeological aspect to the runestone because the farmer pulled it out of the ground. It was well documented, but they really don't have anything to say. So I wish they would shut their mouths.
That's right.
In reference to the runestone, what do you think is the strongest piece of evidence that says that this is evidence of pre-Columbian,
activity in North America?
Yeah.
yeah, the simplest thing is, you know, trust the rock. Weathering is absolutely, particularly and runologically, there is a single rune called the dotted R that occurs 3 times in the runestone. And scholars in the early days, well, right up until I started working on the runestone, were unaware of the dotted R. I actually found it on the runestone. I didn't know what the hell it was. But it turns out the dotted R was not known by Scandinavian scholars until 1935, when it was found on a bone, a runic inscription on a bone that was dug up out of an archaeological dig that dated to the 14th century, the same time period as the runestone. And that same year, a grave slab was found at Unearthed Church that was carved in 1314. Again, the exact same time period as the runestone is dated. But it was unknown until these were found in 1935 and then published in 1938. And that begs the question, if this rune, rare known to scholars until 1935, how did it get on the Kensington Runestone in 1898?
Yeah. So the rock doesn't lie.
Unless there's a time traveling hoaxer involved, and we're not.
Well, we got this brilliant hoaxer that is traveling, in the, the settlement area of Minnesota, and he knows more than the scholars in Scandinavia, right?
Right. Yeah. Right.
I mean, it's absurd, but that really is. If there's a magic bullet that proves the runestone is medieval, that's it.
Yeah. It sounds like it. I wanted to ask you, since you're credentialed forensic geologist, and your show reaches a wide audience, right? And how do you balance like scientific rigor with presenting unconventional theories, and how do you balance that and deal with like maybe critics who come back and say, oh, you're challenging the conventional narrative?
Well, look, I mean, you follow the evidence. I mean, period.
Mm-hmm.
And we things with the on the show. I mean, we looked at all kinds of mysterious artifacts.
I know.
Mysterious questions, but and we followed the science. We kept it scientific, and we just went where the evidence took us. And sometimes it took us to a fantastic new discovery that changes history.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, a couple of times, we found hoaxes.
Sure.
Some people have claimed, oh, gee, everything you find is real. Well, if you're paying attention, that's not true. And the other thing is, I never left my job when I did the show. And my customers watch, and I can't do stupid stuff.
Right.
I can't be involved in nonsense. So we always kept it real. I never lied to the audience. And, I think it showed because my customers love it. And as long as they're happy, they're going to we're doing that. So just keep it real, man. I don't make it up for anybody because I'm too smart to remember BS anyway. I'm too dumb to remember BS.
Yeah, that's one of the things I really liked about the show too, is, I was a little bit obsessed with it there for a while, to the point where my wife would come home and be like, you're watching Scott Wolter again? I'm like, I'm sorry. But one of my favorite things was that, you follow the science, you follow the method, and you really take I want to call it almost like a detective type approach to it. And that's I would imagine what forensics is all about, right?
You are 100% correct. Hey, can I stop and get gas real quick?
Of course, yeah.
Go ahead, take your time.
Okay, I'm just going to pull over and then put the pump in and keep going. But I'm really glad you noticed that, because in material forensics, which I've been doing for 40 years, the process is the same. It doesn't matter if you're looking at concrete, a mysterious artifact, or Bigfoot. You know,
Mhm,
you gather the evidence, you put together the facts, you analyze those facts, and you follow them where they go, and then if you have enough evidence to draw a definitive conclusion, you go there. And there are some times when I have to say I don't know, and I got to tell you, I don't like doing that. But if it's appropriate, I don't have a choice. I have to do it. So that's the way it is. The scientific method is the scientific method, whether you like it or not.
Yeah. And so, could you tell us a little bit about how the show got started? America Unearthed. Like, what was that an idea that you had that you brought to
No,
certain channels, or
no,
what happened?
it's actually a really good story. I was, I was working on the Runestone, and we actually did we had a murder case that came into the lab. A murder victim was found in Las Vegas, buried in a shallow grave in the desert outside Las Vegas. But what was unique about this is she was totally encased in concrete. And so what they wanted us to do was to try to age date the concrete. And I said to them, look, I have a couple of things that we could try. I make no promises. I don't know if it's going to work, but if you're willing to try, I'm willing to try. And they said, we have nowhere else to go. So we did it, and it actually worked out really good. And we actually won a grand award for that work in the engineering community by taking existing, scientific techniques and applying them in a whole new way. And we were able to help them nail down how old, the concrete was. And then they went and looked at the missing, persons cases, and they were able to find her because what they did was they posted a drawing of the victim, and based on, they had, obviously the body was there and the bones were there, and they did a reconstruction, and actually the molding of her face in the concrete was so good, they were able to get a good enough drawing that somebody recognized her. Wow. And they said it was they got one person, and she called in and said, I think I know who your Jane Doe is. She gave them the name. They pulled the dental records, and they had the upper and lower jaw, and it was a match. And I mean, I'll never forget that because, he called me about 4 months after we did the work. He told me that story. And I had told him earlier, I wrote in my report that I thought that she had been there between 1 to 3 years. And then he came and visited our lab after I wrote the report. I took him to a wild hockey game, Detective Tom Monahan. And he looked at me at one point, we're drinking our beers, and he had these just, these riveting eyes that just looked right through you. And he said to me, what do you really think? And I knew what he was asking me. He was asking me, what do you really think as far as the timing? And I said, well, I think she's been there between 1.5 and 2 years. I said 1.5 to 2 years. And he goes, me too. And then 4 months later, he calls me and he said, Scott, I thought you'd like to know that she was reported missing 1 year and 10 months from when we found her. And
right? All the money.
I said, I'll never forget, I said to myself, God damn, this shit actually works.
Wow.
So anyway, so that's sort of a long version. So anyway, the local news heard about it. And so they came into my office to interview me about the murder case. And the woman that came in to interview me, her name was Maria Oz. She and her husband, Andy, own the company, the production company, Committee Films, that did our show. But at the time, they were just starting the company, and she was still working as an investigative reporter for WCCO TV, the local TV station. And anyway, she walks into my office, to talk to me about the murder case. And I had just come back from Sweden on one of the 5 trips I took looking for the language, runes, dialect, grammar, all that stuff. And I had a poster from a conference that we spoke at. And it's Olaf standing next to the runestone. And she goes, oh, that's Olaf Ullman in the runestone. She said, have you done any work on that? And I said, sit down, honey. And then I told her, and she went back home and she told her husband, Andy, she said, hey, I met this guy. He does all this work on the runestone. And I think that would, that could be a really good story that we could do a documentary on. So we got together, we hit it off, and we decided we wanted to do a documentary about the work that I had done on the runestone.
Mm-hmm,
and we raised $150,000. And then they put together a 4.5-minute pitch reel. We went over, with that money, we went over to Europe, to Sweden, to France, to Scotland, to Denmark, and got some great video. And then we put together this 4.5-minute trailer, and they aired it at Real Screen. And that's where all the networks and the production companies go to sell their, their products.
Yep.
And lo and behold, 6 networks wanted it, and History Channel ended up paying the most. They gave us a bigger budget, and we made the film Holy Grail in America. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but if you haven't, you should check it out. It's actually quite good.
I sure have.
Okay. Well, that did really good. And so they said, hey, can we do more? Is there any more of this kind of stuff? And I said, hell yeah. And so then we did another documentary called Who Really Discovered America? And that did really well. And then they came back and said, hey, do you think there's enough here for a series? And we said, well, of course. And then America Unearthed was made. So that's how it came to be.
Wow. So you had never actually intended to be on TV or entertainment before?
No, I didn't. I had no idea. I was just doing my job, and it was just a great story. And, I didn't. And at the time, I was just beginning to go down the road of the Templars. I didn't fully understand it like I do now. But I knew that we were onto something important. And I also, I was really motivated by the fact that I met the descendants of the guy that found the runestone, who was blamed for carving it, right? And of course he did not carve it, and I knew that. And to this day, the family still, gets harassed, and, Darwin's grandfather is accused of doing this, and he didn't. So there's a personal aspect to this too that was driving me. But, the whole time, and I told this to the family, I said, look, whatever the evidence says, that's where I'm going to go. So I hope you don't get disappointed if it doesn't go your way. And they just said to me, look, there's never been a doubt in this family. We know what the truth is. You can do whatever you want. You can look at all the information we have. We have nothing to hide because we know what the truth is. And they were right.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So, yeah. And I'm not going to stop until the world accepts the truth. And right now, if you go on Wikipedia or on the internet, they still say it's a fake, but there's no fucking evidence for it. Sorry about that.
You can swear on our show.
But I mean, it's unbelievable because there's just no evidence for it. And I'll say it here again. I have made a public challenge to any academic that wants to take me on one-on-one in a debate, a public debate, on the Kensington Runestone. And nobody's taken me up on it. You know why?
Yes, because they're going to lose.
Because I'll slaughter them.
The evidence is there.
I mean, think about this. We have all this evidence in multiple disciplines, including geology, history, language, runes, dialect, grammar, Easter table dating, history of the late 19th century, history of the mid 14th century, that is consistent, cohesive, and conclusive. And if that's true and it is authentic, which it is, then how can there possibly be evidence to support the contrary? It can't exist, and it doesn't exist. And that's why they won't take me on.
Yeah, it makes me think about like how nowadays we find out that more and more that the mainstream narrative isn't true across all domains. And so
Right.
when we see it in real time, the lies that we get, why should we believe the narrative of the past either? You know what I mean? What we should be asking questions about all this stuff.
In one of my books, the first book I wrote on this, called Kensington Runestone, Compelling New Evidence, one of the chapters in the book that is my favorite is Scandals in Scholarship. I wanted to call it something else, but, that's what we ended up calling it. But some of the things that have happened are so reprehensible and just so dishonest by so-called scholars that we, the public, put our trust in, right?
Exactly.
And these assholes absolutely violate it because they could get away with it at the time. But unfortunately for them, we were able to dig it up and figure out what they did and what they continue to do. And it's just reprehensible. So I'm not afraid to call them out, and I'm going to call, a liar, and, I'll bring the receipts. I don't just call people names. I will prove that they're not telling us the truth.
What do you think the primary motivation is for academia or the pushback to just dismiss this without even engaging with it?
Well, it's a number of things. In some cases, it's protecting turf, territoriality. Sometimes it's laziness. Sometimes it's fear. Oftentimes it's arrogance. It's never that they work too hard to try to get to the truth. That's never the case. So, it's a bunch of things, but it boils down to human condition is what I like to call it. And it's certainly not that they did their jobs. A lot of these scholars in the beginning looked at these runes and these symbols, and they did not have a clue as to what they were looking at. And they were afraid to say three little words. I don't know. So instead of doing it, it was easier to say, oh, that's a hoax, and make it go away. And in fact, it's not a hoax. So now they have to, a lot of these guys are long gone, right? But they just did not have the courage, and their egos would not allow them to say what they needed to say. And that is, I don't know. And by the way, I'm not afraid to say it. I don't like to say it, but if it's appropriate, I will say it. And I've said it many times. I don't know. And guess what? It doesn't hurt. It's okay.
Yeah. It reminds me of a quote I read of yours, which is, in my business, I trust rocks. I don't trust some people. Rocks don't have an agenda.
It's true, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I trusted the rock, and the rock told me that it was real. Therefore, logic demands that everything in that inscription must be consistent with the 14th century, because that's the date on the stone. And that's why I went to Sweden 5 times, because I knew the evidence had to be there. And it was, and I found it all. Now, one of the questions that I get from people is, well, Scott, that's great and everything, but how come you found all this and you came over from America and you don't really know runes and all that stuff very well? I actually know it pretty good, but how come you found it and they didn't? And that's a fair question. And the reason is actually quite simple. When I went over in the early 2000s, nearly everything that I found that they had never seen before, I found on the island of Gotland on grave slabs that were mortared into the floors of the churches, or, they'd been put up hanging on the sides of the church, the oldest grave slabs that dated to the 14th century and before that. And that's where all the evidence was. But it turned out, just by chance, that the last place the Scandinavian scholars studied the runic inscriptions of Sweden was on the island of Gotland. And they were just being published while I was there. And so the reality is, I'm the first person in history to look at those medieval grave slabs in context with the Kensington Runestone. So I'd love to tell you that I'm special, but I'm not. I just was the first guy to do it. But the rock told me it was there. I just had to find it, and I did.
Yeah, you had to have the open mind and the courage, like you said. I mean, I not to blow smoke up your ass, but it does take courage to, put yourself.
Oh, go ahead, blow a lot of smoke.
Well, it
I
does
love
take
it.
courage to put yourself out there, like Robert Schoch did, 30 plus years ago on the Sphinx, because you will get assassinated,
Right. Yeah.
character-wise, and sometimes even professionally, if it goes too far against the narrative,
Well, let me tell you, I've experienced everything Dr. Schoch has experienced and probably more. I had one guy dedicate his blog to ripping me and everything I did. I had another guy that I walked out of the building for insubordination. This guy was emailing the scholars in Scandinavia, telling them that I was full of shit from his workplace, and he worked for me. And so we walked him out of the building. Well, he was terrible. He was incompetent, and he was a failed academic. He had a PhD in geology, and he just hated my guts because I have a lowly bachelor's degree, but I went to work because my dad died. I would love to have continued my education, but I couldn't. And I was able to, carve out a nice career. And, this stuff we're talking about, I never planned on any of it. And he was just jealous. And so when I was doing America Unearthed, filed ethics complaints in 38 states that we filmed in, saying that I was practicing geology without a license.
What?
Including in Minnesota. Yeah. Well, obviously it never went anywhere, but I'm telling you. And I can't even tell you how many academics have called me a fraud, a pseudoscientist, a pseudo-archaeologist. And I say, look, you can call, but don't call me a pseudo-archaeologist. That's a true insult. I'm not an archaeologist. I'm a geologist. And I'm being facetious here a little bit because geologists are closed-minded a-holes like a lot of the ones I've met. There are some really good, open-minded archaeologists. Haley, my partner, Haley Ramsey, she's one. So I don't want to put all of them, paint them all with the same brush, but far too many of them are closed-minded and territorial and lazy and, the whole thing we talked about.
That's actually one of Dave and I's favorite things about the Cosmic Summit. And we explore this whole greater theme of academia and scholarly issues on our show. But Cosmic Summit brings together people from both sides of that spectrum. You've got PhD professors right there presenting alongside other alternative researchers.
Yeah.
And that's what we like about it. It creates an open forum where people sincerely entertain other people's perspectives and decide what they think is best.
Well, it is wonderful, and it really is groundbreaking stuff. And the Cosmic Summit really is the first place where you're bringing these people together. And let's face it, you got to think outside of the box, or be able to think outside of the box to wrap your head around this whole Younger Dryas impact and the profound change in interpretations that have been around for a long time. That fact demands that you have to rethink things. Now, one of the things that's come up recently are these underground structures beneath the pyramids that absolutely would completely just be like an atom bomb on the accepted narrative, right?
We've been talking about this for a few weeks. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, let me tell you where I'm at. I'm open-minded. I think it's wonderful that, this is put out there, but I'm not going to get excited until they do some angled drilling, exploratory drilling, and that's how you're going to confirm these structures. And it's really easy. It's not that difficult to do. You can take a 4-inch auger and you can go down over 2,000 feet and angle it into these structures. And it's pretty easy to tell when you're getting out of natural soils or natural rock and into something that's not natural. So that's what it's going to take for me to get on board. But I'm excited about the idea, the technology. They're talking about ultrasonic technology, sound waves, and that works really well. I've worked with it myself. So I understand the technology, but I'm not going to get excited until they can actually verify it. And I think angle drilling is the way to start. And if you hit something, well, now you got to start drilling and get a little more sophisticated and figure out what the hell those things are.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's so. I don't know if you saw the Pierce Morgan with Jimmy from Bright Insight and Flint Dibble and all that from about 2 weeks ago.
I have not because I've been traveling constantly and I haven't had an opportunity, frankly.
It was very interesting to see a discussion like that on such a mainstream platform. But the reason I brought it up was because Jimmy kept saying, why don't we just drill down there and see? It would be so easy. And in my mind, I was thinking, I don't know how easy that would be. So I'm glad to get some clarification from you that it wouldn't be, quote, easy, but it's definitely doable to, get down there.
No, what I'm saying is, my testing company, my lab is part of a larger testing firm called American Engineering and Testing. And one of the things we do is drilling.
Right.
I know exactly how to do it and how it can be done. And you can do angle drilling because, you want to get obviously beyond the perimeter of the pyramids. And then you need to angle back in and get to where those structures are based on the images that I've seen. But that's not a problem. So, and it's just, you don't need to go a mile deep. You can just go down a few hundred feet, which really isn't that big of a deal, to see if those structures are there.
Yeah, for sure. And I wanted to, you had brought up the Younger Dryas impact theory and that kind of thing, and I wanted to ask you because we had mentioned Dr. Schock as well. He likes the solar flare idea. What's your take? Are you an impact or a solar flare guy as far as what caused the Younger Dryas?
Well, if I had to, if you had a knife to my throat and I had to pick one, personally, I've always liked the extraterrestrial impact theory. But several years ago, when Dr. Schock, first was lecturing about this, at least the first time I heard it was probably maybe 8 or 9 years ago. And I was very, very impressed with his presentation. And somebody else, I can't remember who presented on the Younger Dryas, Younger Dryas wasn't even mentioned back then. It was just the impact theory, which I had always, really liked, but they were not as persuasive as Robert was. So, my initial opinion was the impact theory is pretty strong. But the other thing that it was Graham Hancock. What am I talking about? It was Graham Hancock. And it was really interesting because at this particular conference, there was a little bit of, what should I say, a little angst between them. And I remember we got together after they both spoke, and I said, guys, it's not necessarily one or the other. It could be both, right? So, yeah. And, I'm sure that they've thought about that, but I think when they heard it from a third party, it's I think even they were both a little bit guilty of, and I don't want to overstate this, but I think they both were pretty, married to their own ideas, and
Right.
we're arguing their point of view. But I think once they sort of took a step back and go, well, hey, maybe both are true, because we're not necessarily talking about the exact same time period, because their numbers were off a little bit, but they both made a compelling case. Say, I think it's probably both. I don't think it's one or the other.
I agree. I think there's room for both. Both have probably been going on cyclically or periodically over 6,000 to 12,000 year intervals for many, many millennia. So
Yeah.
either or could have happened. We're sure that both have taken place in the past. So
why not?
I was persuaded by Shock as well at Cosmic Summit last year. I hadn't read much about his take on it, and I was firmly in the camp of Impact. And then walking away from Cosmic Summit last year, I was like, the man himself kind of maybe. And now I sit somewhere in the middle myself, and I'm a social worker by trade. I'm not a scientist, but you're
smart enough to be dangerous, right?
Yes, exactly. But my logic puts me in the middle as well on this. And but what's interesting is to see guys like OGs like Robert Schoch and Graham Hancock, who kind of started this whole thing, kind of arguing, and then I could just imagine afterwards. That scene the scene you just told us, that was a really cool story. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, well, and there was another conference that I met Robert at before that, and it's going back probably 12 or 13 years. That was the first time I met him, and we were talking about his weathering work on the Sphinx, pushing it back over 10,000 years and beyond. And one of the things that I mentioned to him that at the time he was not aware of, and that was of precession of the equinoxes. And I talked to him about it, and I said, Robert, there's also another hard science that supports your geological work. And he didn't need to convince me of his geological work. I thought it was absolutely solid. But I said, at the time that the Sphinx was built, the constellation of Leo was in the eastern sky. And it was the primary constellation of the zodiac going back, about 10 to 12,000 years ago. And it was there for a couple thousand years. So when the Sphinx was first constructed, well, let's just say I have it on good authority that is when, and that is why it was constructed. And of course, the head that was once a lion has been recut into the head of a pharaoh. But if you go back to that time period, that confirms his geological weathering work. And he was very compelled by that. And now he's using it as part of the conversation. But
what was the time period where the Leo was in the eastern sky? Was it like the 10,500 BC?
I think it's I'm just guessing, but I think it's between 10 to 12,000 years ago.
Okay,
that sounds right. I think you're right.
I think you're right
that
too.
Would put it,
and then that would
put it right around the Younger Dryas.
It would, and it would also be.
Hey, if you guys want to hold on, I can tell you the exact date. Hold on.
Let's go.
I can find it. I got it here. Hold on. So I got to go into the documents, and it is right here. Okay. Now I just got to put my glasses on so I can read it.
So is Haley driving? Are you with Haley right now?
Just a sec here. Here it is. Okay. Constellation Leo. Date 10/8 to 8640 BC. So add 2,000 years to that. 12.8 to 10.640.
Wow.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Boom.
Right
Right?
on the money.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's proof that the people back then knew about a 25,772 year cycle called
We're
precession of the
talking about
equinox.
the precession of the equinoxes. Exactly.
Yeah.
Hey, they've known about it for a lot longer than that, my friend,
Yeah.
because they knew, look, this whole impact, the data that we have, the information we have, this happens every half cycle. So every 12 to 13,000 years, or 12.8, right?
Yep.
So, yeah, this is what's going to come out. And I think what happens is our solar system intersects with a meteor shower, or there's regular solar flare activity, or both.
Or both. Yeah.
And the Earth is impacted by that, and the cultures that are living on the planet, they have to deal with some heavy shit.
Yep.
Yeah. And then the ones who have the skills to survive a catastrophe like that are the ones who survive and rebuild civilization.
Absolutely.
That's why
Absolutely.
That's why all the different cultures around the globe have similar flood myths coming from the same time
That's
periods.
exactly why. That's exactly why.
Yeah, and then along comes Göbekli Tepe and kind of pushes everything back to the mainstream, and then they have to adjust to it, and there's been some pushback on even that.
Well, they can push back all they want, but they better bring some evidence to the table, or kindly sit down and shut your pie hole. I'm sick of people telling us what they think. I don't care what you think unless you have evidence to support it.
Right, right. What is your thoughts on the debate going on about the trees that were planted on Göbekli Tepe and then the subsequent removal of them? Have you heard about any of that?
I have not heard anything about that. What's the skinny? Give me the tea.
Go ahead,
So
Mike.
subplot that's been unfolding. Basically, a grove of olive trees have been planted on some of the sites at Göbekli Tepe, which they said was to add value back to the land for the farmers or whoever nearby that you took it from. It seemed like a really thinly veiled excuse for not digging anything else up. So now that enough attention has been brought to it, and we were actually talking with someone on our show last week that those roots will help protect against soil erosion to a certain extent. And then depending on how far below the ground is the archaeology of interest that you're trying to preserve, those roots could either protect it, or if the roots go too far, they could begin to destroy it. So
which was a concern.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. And, there's, I mean, the simplest explanation would be, oh, they needed the wood to build boats or whatever the case may be, right? But that's usually not the simplest answer in this case. Usually is not the right answer. And I got to be honest with you guys, I'd like to get a little more data on it before I just won't be able to say anything intelligent about it unless I know a little more. But it sounds to me like this is fertile ground for an investigation, and sounds like there might be something profound going on there that they're not sure about yet.
Yeah, I would definitely look into it in your spare time. I know you're a busy man, but it's definitely a mystery involving geology that I think you could lend some insight to.
Yeah.
There's something I wanted to pivot to. I grew up in Nova Scotia, okay?
Oh, yeah.
And I want to tell you.
I know what you're going to ask me.
Well,
hey, guys, I just
go ahead.
realized that I'm about to run out of juice because I had to unplug to keep us from going back and forth.
How much you got left?
So I just plugged in. I don't plug in.
We can wind it down in case those audio issues come.
Well,
back.
let's see how this goes. Can you hear me okay, or should I?
Yep.
Is this better?
Nope.
Well, Scott, we appreciate you calling in from the road. That's exciting. Scott's on his way to from place to place, checking out cool stuff. We got a good interview in.
Is he gone?
Well, you know what, guys? Need anything else? Just call me on my cell.
Okay, that was great.
Okay, great.
Thanks. It was great to meet you.
Okay.
We look forward to seeing you again
that was me.
in person.
Thank you so much, man. Take care.